obviously what happened in 2008 and 2009 was a really big deal in terms of the economy. And into that mix, Barack Obama's done a great job of stemming the tide of the economy sliding, turning it around and getting it going. But both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump have seen really key things, which is that the distribution of the benefits of that economic turnaround have not gone widely throughout the economy. And then you couple that with Donald Trump, who says it's not just what's happening at the larger economic level, it's those people's fault. And so he points the finger at Mexican immigrants. He points the finger at Muslim Americans who are coming to the country who are causing violence, and he causes that. He says that. So I think he is a part of a really destructive strain, but he taps into a level of resentment that exists out there for some very real and understandable reasons, even if we don't agree with how people want to address those problems.
Well, and following up on that, all elections, all presidential elections are essentially a mandate on the current or the past administration, particularly a two-term president who's done, no matter how successful Obama's record is probably mixed, at least in terms of his popularity and so forth, it's usually a response to, and often a rejection of, what's in place now and a desire to move forward, a desire for change. Doesn't that compound sort of Hillary Clinton's dilemma in that either against Bernie Sanders in the primary certainly, but against Donald Trump in the general, she sort of is the establishment candidate who sort of is campaigning for a third term of Obama's presidency in an electoral atmosphere where people want change, where notwithstanding how much the economy has recovered, people aren't feeling it, people aren't feeling that it's really successful, and she becomes the establishment in a year where it seems to me it's a very bad time to be the establishment.
I always thought in the last couple of years when people were, all my Republican friends were telling me that Jeb Bush was going to be the nominee of the Republican Party, I could not believe that a country that had the biggest kinds of electoral swings from 2008 to 2010, 2012 to 2014 would end up at the end of the day with Hillary Clinton versus Jeb Bush. It's like we were just going to go back 20 years in our electoral contest. And I think now we've seen it. I just saw a poll this morning, I think it was ABC poll, that has, this is what's really dangerous and makes me as a Democrat nervous. Hillary Clinton beats Donald Trump on all these qualifications, foreign policy, commander-in-chief, all these things. Donald Trump beats Hillary Clinton on will bring change, 55, 30 something. That's a very dangerous number.
There you have it. Well, in that regard too, past elections have sort of been fights for the middle. Obama versus Romney, Obama versus McCain. Going back to the Clinton years, the Democratic Party started with sort of 47% of the vote. The Republican nominee started with 47% of the vote, and 5-6% swing voters were up for grabs, and the battle was in the middle. I suspect that that's not going to be the case this time. I supported Hillary Clinton in the New Hampshire primary, and I haven't been with Bernie, but I suspect that she needs to move more to the left, embrace a more populist message, and forget this playbook where all the battles for the middle. She needs to embrace what Sanders is doing and take up some of his message, or else she's in trouble.
I think that's right. There's I started my first campaign was Bill Clinton's '92 race, and then was around for the re-elect. And there's a real, I think they've got to get out of their heads. Hopefully, the Clinton campaign has to get out of their heads this idea that this is the 1990s. The country has changed demographically a lot. Parties have changed a lot. This is not about this race to the center. And so, if I were on the Clinton campaign, I would advise them to take this period of still fighting Bernie Sanders, not as a time to sort of ignore him, but to really try to hone a message that would appeal to Bernie Sanders voters. Because what makes me the most nervous is that Hillary Clinton won't make the appeal to bring home those Bernie Sanders voters, and there aren't really enough voters in the middle to go after to get them to come over. Everyone talks about this big independent number, but if you look at independents, most independents vote one way or the other, right? They vote either as Democrats or either as Republicans. So there was a number about, there's a Fox News poll last week that made me, again, nervous. I'm so you can tell I'm nervous.
So am I.
if you're catching the theme of my remarks, I'm very nervous. That there's a Fox News poll where Donald Trump is beating Hillary Clinton 55-31 among white voters, right? The reason that's bad is because Barack Obama won about 40% of white votes in the last election when he was considered, to be at his least popular moment in the country. He won 40% of white voters. There's a 9% delta between Hillary and the president right now. My suspicion, that I didn't unpack it enough in the crosstabs, is that 9% are probably Bernie voters who are unwilling to declare themselves for Hillary Clinton until after he gets out of the race. So she's got to figure out how does she get those voters back on board in order to really close that gap and have a chance. If she can close that 9% and just to delve into it more, the president got 44% of white women in 2012. He got 38% of white men. You probably think that maybe there's some fall off among men. Maybe there's some fall off among African Americans because the president's now on the ticket. She's doing better among Latinos, so that'll be helpful. But she's got to get that 44% of white women number up higher, closer to 50, I think, to make up for whatever drop-offs there are. So as you're thinking about this, really think about how these demographics play out. And the question about young people, everybody says young people don't vote. You don't need young people to vote in huge numbers. What you need is, you need young people to make up about 20% of the electorate. In 2008 and 2012, young people were about 20% of the electorate and the president won. In 2010 and 2014, they were under 15%. They were closer to 12 or 13% of the electorate, and the Republicans won the Congress. So you've got to get enough young people to vote. You've got to get 67, 70% of Latinos in the Democratic column. You need African American turnout to stay up, but you got to get, particularly white women, you got to get that number higher, I think, in order for Democrats to win.
And doesn't that go back to a more populist economic message is going to be key to, they're clearly not with Hillary just because she's a woman.
Right.
They're not voting their gender yet, at least. And her message, or sort of lack thereof at some level, has not broken through to them, whereas Obama's, as you mentioned, did. I wonder, in terms of the vice presidential sort of sweepstakes, whether, again, if she picks a Tim Kaine or Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown's a pretty progressive guy, but still it's going to be viewed as sort of an establishment choice, exactly.
I'm sorry. Did I do that out loud?
And will reinforce the signal that she's going for the center, and she's, I know this will never happen, but my dream ticket, because I think they would clobber Trump, would be Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. I don't know if they're going to get, they're going to be able to do that, but I think they would win. That's not going to happen, though. So what's she going to do, and which way is she going to go? Is it Elizabeth Warren, maybe?
I see your Bernie Sanders, and I'll raise you in Elizabeth Warren. I think my belief is Elizabeth Warren brings you all of Bernie Sanders' positives without his negatives. And I think for the men who may be thrown off by two women on the ticket, they're probably unreliable.
They're probably already gone,
for Hillary anyway.
aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what you really have to do, so it's all about your theory of the case. If your theory of the case is you've got to get more women excited about Hillary so that they show up and beat the offset of men, then get them excited. So a friend of mine said, Hillary's campaign so far has been a little bit like incremental change you can believe in. You really kind of need Hillary to have like something that is shooting the moon. You need her some way to get people excited. And Democratic voters, as angry as they are, as upset as they are, and as fearful as they may be about Donald Trump, surge voters, the atypical voters that we need to turn out in an election, are people who need to be in love. And it doesn't matter how many times they have their hearts broken, they need to be in love about something, right? And so you got to get them, you got to give them something to be really phenomenally for. And that's what Sanders has been fantastic at, is giving them something. Bernie Sanders goes out and says, free college free college tuition for everyone. And then Hillary says, I'm going to help you renegotiate your student loans with the banks. Now, her opinion is probably the one that's more likely to happen,
right.
But how exciting is that for if you're like 19 years old, right? You haven't even seen a bank statement yet for your student loans, so you don't know how bad that is.
Well, another I think, fear of mine is that, Trump definitely is, he's a candidate, it's white identity politics, it's very sort of European, it's like Le Pen and in France and so forth. That's his message. Blaming certain groups for the country's problems, wanting to restore greatness, this sort of the man on horseback sort of authoritarian nationalism.
He's like Le Pen mixed with a little Silvio Berlusconi.
Or Berlusconi, exactly. But my fear is that Hillary responds with an identity politics of her own. It's multicultural. It's with women, Latinos, African Americans, LGBT, which is all great. But I think if she conducts an identity campaign, she loses.
Right.
And that's what it's looking like right now.
Here's the thing about the Bernie voters is I think that what they want is not really an identity style. They kind of want the same things a lot of the other allies are looking for, right? So they want somebody who's going to sort of reorient the politics about what's going on. They want somebody who's going to stand up for LGBT rights. They want somebody who's going to. If you go to a Black Lives Matter rally, the thing that's the most interesting, which you don't see on television, is like 40% of that crowd is white. Right, but you don't really see that on television, and so those people are Bernie voters mostly. I heard someone on the Hillary Clinton team say something like, "Well, we'll get those Democrats to come home in the fall." But think about it like this: if you're 29 years old, let's say you weren't old enough to vote for John Kerry in 2004 because you were 17. You probably voted for Barack Obama in the primaries in 2008. You probably are voting for Bernie Sanders this year. What are you coming home to? I mean, you are home, right? And so you got to get people to make a decision to do something differently than they've done before. And so that idea of wooing people is very different than expecting them to kind of wake up and realize, oh my goodness, we have to go be for Hillary Clinton.
Right. So I don't want to build up Trump too. I mean, he has some vulnerabilities for sure. As well. Is it possible because of his weaknesses that some other states that have historically not been in play, I'm thinking of places like Arizona, Indiana, Missouri, for Democrats now are back in play, either because sort of moderate, educated Republicans stay home, Latinos vote in historic number, some dynamics like that change the electoral map from the other side. Do you see that possible?
I think it's very possible that Trump could get voters that we don't expect. Particularly, I think there's a real case among men because he just is like walking swagger, right? And so we were talking about this earlier. If I walk past a television in my office, we have like sort of a television in the lobby, and I see Donald Trump on television, I stop and I watch it just to see what the crazy is today, right? And then I keep going. And there's something about that that's just attractive, and people like sort of a show. And I think that he can gin up a little bit more. He can tick up some of these numbers in places we don't expect. That then make him, a tougher candidate in the fall.
Yeah. Well, in the past,
and then some Republicans will drop off. But I think the number of Republicans who don't vote for him is a lot smaller than the media makes it out to be.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, people wear red jerseys or blue jerseys.
Yeah. Well, in the past, of course, we elected generals as president because they're war heroes, they were famous and so forth. Everyone knew who they were. Now it's a reality TV star. He entered the race at 99% name recognition. Yeah. Bernie Sanders entered with 3% name recognition, which gives you some sense of what Bernie Sanders has accomplished.
And Hillary wasn't far behind him in terms of name recognition.
No.
And they also are the same in terms of negatives.
Right.
So what happens is you actually have the way people's negatives grow in the course of a campaign. We start out with people at their peak name ID and probably at around their peak negative. And so anybody who's looking for real inspiration this year is going to be probably in a tough spot because you're not going to spend $100 million trying to convince people about something about Donald Trump that they don't already know, or Hillary Clinton something that they don't already know. The question is going to be about turning out people and how do you depress soft Democrats from voting for Hillary and depress soft Republicans from voting for Trump. So expect the most negative year of campaigning you've probably seen in 20.
Yeah. Post-Civil War, the Democrats owned the South for 100 years, right? And then Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act and so forth. And it reversed. And Democrats no longer held the South, Republicans held the South. The parties literally almost traded places in some sense. Is that happening a little bit again, where the working class used to be the sort of base of the Democratic Party? It's now the Tea Party, in some sense. It's sort of the Tea Party base.
Well, this year it's like Queens versus Westchester, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing. We have two candidates from New York that could be.
Yeah. But I mean, it's the parties have much different constituencies than they did never mind, during the 40s or 50s, but even a few cycles back, you've seen a significant shift. What's that mean for, the Republican Party doesn't look like it did even under Mitt Romney. The Democratic Party, certainly the Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders battle is a fight for the soul of the Democratic Party and how progressive or sort of establishment it is. What are your thoughts on that, where the political parties are sort of transforming before our very eyes?
I think they are, what's happening is everything's getting more hard-boiled. And again, I think people who are Democrats are becoming more blue, people who are Republicans are becoming more red. And you aren't getting, I saw some number, only 5% of people are really ticket splitters anymore, somewhere between 5 and 6%. And so that is changing the way people campaign and run. Now, what's also changing the way the country works is demographics. And so you have now states like North Carolina, Virginia, that are becoming more purple, where they used to be red. In the next 10 years, you'll see states like Georgia, obviously Florida's always been kind of went that way. You'll see some of these states come on to the playing field that we hadn't seen before, just because the demographics are changing. And it's not just the racial demographics. What's happening is you're seeing voters from the Northeast or from Michigan and Ohio who are now moving south to some of these where the jobs are. And they are, and for better lifestyles, particularly as they retire, right? And you're seeing that retirement shift. And so that is all changing the math about how these states will play out over the next couple of years. And what makes me the most nervous, just as an American, not really just as a Democrat, is that we end up with parties that begin to look a little bit more like South Africa, right? Where you have one big multiracial party that exists in the country, and then you have one kind of more right-leaning white party that exists in the country. And then, we win presidential elections, and then they win congressional elections, and then we kind of have this battle that takes place all the time, which I think over time just doesn't really make the country work over the long term. So we've got to figure out, I would, even as a Democrat, I would love to have a Republican Party that really competed for the votes of brown people in the country in some way, and a Democratic Party that could encourage more white voters to sort of come in and align with it, who may agree with it. And I did most of my political career working for politicians from the South, Bill Clinton and Bob Graham and Wesley Clark and a bunch of people who were Al Gore. So a bunch of Southern guys who really were trying to figure this math out, and at some part in their career had figured it out for the most part. And now to see us splitting apart I think it has wider implications.
You mentioned that the Democratic Party has, in essence, become a presidential party, and the Republican Party a congressional party, and that certainly has held true through the last few cycles. With Trump as the Republican nominee, though, are there realistic chances, and given the seats that are up, where the more Republican incumbents are running and so forth? I know in New Hampshire, Kelly Ayotte, the Republican incumbent, is in a very tight race against our Democratic governor, and I think it will go whichever way the presidential goes, probably. Do the Democrats have a realistic chance of winning back the Senate?
I think so. Look at New Hampshire is a great example. Ohio is a state that could switch parties. Illinois is one. In fact, Illinois is leaning so far to the Democrats this year that some people are starting to reorient money into other places because it just looks like it's going to happen. Wisconsin. There are a few states that are out there. There's probably 5 states, I think, that are really trending toward the Democrats, which I think for people who care about issues are going to matter, because when you get to the Senate, you'll have people to talk to. The problem is the House, it's so hard for the House to change until there's a redistricting, that the House will always kind of be an impediment to the party. Even if the Democrats hold the presidency, the House is going to be a tough place to get passed. So, and a Senate that's probably 51 or 52 votes in one direction or another means you're far from that 60-vote margin you need to pass anything. So I actually suspect on issues of big national policy, we won't see a lot of movement in one direction or the other. The places where it really matters is going to be on regulation. How the regulators, who controls the FCC, the SEC, all those places, FTC, and then some of the enforcement stuff around, who's at the Justice Department, all those places. So I think that's going to matter a lot more in the next few years. In a way, this may be controversial to say, but maybe this is how it's supposed to be, right? Like maybe we're supposed to have gridlock because we don't actually have a governing consensus. And so without a governing consensus, you really shouldn't have a government that can do big actions. You actually should have a government that locks up. And now it's brutal to live through, but if I was on the other side of this, let's say Hillary Clinton loses, I may be really in favor of a divided government or a government that can't get anything done.
On certain issues, though, where the clock is ticking against us, climate change being the most existential, we really can't withstand too many more years of gridlock and no fiscal policy, just monetary policy, the government at a standstill, whereas if the Democrats don't win back the Senate, or if Trump wins the election, they do, or there's all kinds of scenarios where I just see continued gridlock.
Yeah, and who knows where Trump will be on climate change? You know, you guys have seen the papers.
He has called it a Chinese conspiracy.
He says a conspiracy, but then companies go out and they, try to build a wall to save themselves. So I think that there's a, I think that matters in something like climate change. My advice on climate change, though, is we really have to build a national movement around it where people are willing to make it a priority in their voting. And that's the thing that moves politicians. As much as people give lip service to it, as much as everyone says it's an important issue, when you judge, climate change versus a whole raft of other issues, in the comparison, it doesn't hold up. And so a politician can only go one way or the other, and they tend to go with the issue they know people are going to vote on or vote against.
Yeah.
So it's like guns.
Yeah.
Like everyone's for gun control except for the people who aren't, and the people who aren't are going to vote on the fact that they're not for it.
Right. Whereas people don't vote on climate, basically.
Right.
Yeah. We have about 15 minutes for some questions from the audience. So if anyone would like to ask a question, why don't you come up to the microphone here in the center, and Jamal will be glad to answer them.
I'll try.
Tom Nowak from Illinois, a state that's not working well because of gridlock. A question on, you mentioned climate change.
Yeah.
And are you familiar with in the House, the Bipartisan Climate Solution Caucus? I was wondering, is there any sense that that group, now numbering 12 members, a bipartisan group, could carve out the middle in this kind of election where a lot of moderates from both sides, want to carve out that space?
I'm not as familiar with that caucus, but I'll tell you as an electoral matter, you really, with healthcare, one of the things people were doing with healthcare that really moved it is you had people who showed up, you saw this in New Hampshire.
Yep.
You had people who showed up every debate, every town hall meeting, every time a candidate showed up somewhere, there were people who showed up and they were healthcare voters and they were demanding change and action and making politicians take stances on it. And at some point, politicians just took a stance because they were tired of being harassed by these people everywhere that they went. There has to be such a vocal outcry for it at the citizen level, at the voter level, that politicians have to react. It's easy for people to join a committee or a caucus in Washington, but the question is, what do they do when they go home, and who are the people who are really pressuring them for it? I would focus more on voters and getting voters to get in people's faces about it, much the way the Tea Party did in 2010.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Sonia Hedrick. I'm a conference scholar and just got my MBA from UC Berkeley. And my question is about, we've been talking about the new ERISA guidance saying that it's okay to consider social environmental performance. With a new administration, should we be concerned that that guidance will be reversed?
I think that you're going to have to push the candidates to take a position on it. And so I'm not sure exactly where the candidates are on this. Do you know?
Well, it hasn't really been talked about too much in the presidential race, but Secretary of Labor, Perez did put through the rule. My guess is if the Republican administration came in and if the Democrats didn't take the Senate, that it would be back in play, because it has gone back and forth, as people here know, over the last several years. And I think it's one of those issues where there is no agreement between the parties on, I think the fiduciary rule will be problematic. So I think, depending on the results, Dodd-Frank is up for grabs, depending on how the election goes. Financial services industry regulation is certainly up for grabs. So in a close, I think it goes to your point. I mean, they'll get, if it's a divided country, again, very, very little will get done. But some of these things that have gone back and forth right at the margins, these are great examples, will probably go back and forth again. And then on big issues like climate, as you mentioned, Jamal, without some kind of mass movement from below, nothing will get done. I mean, Obama did something with his executive authority, but that's all he was able to do because, Congress doesn't do fiscal policy anymore,
Yeah. I was with some Bernie voters on Saturday in California, actually, and it's interesting when the idea came up about how to get them to vote for Hillary. They said, well, the only way I'd vote for her probably is if Bernie or Elizabeth Warren was on the ticket. I didn't even mention Elizabeth Warren; that came up spontaneously, and someone said, well, I don't know that they would do it because I don't know that they would trust Hillary to actually do the things that they wanted to do. But maybe the only way we can trust Hillary to do it is if she picks one of them, because they would stand up so strongly on this that they would actually get, make the financial services industry have to react and change.
Do you think the Clinton campaign gets that they should pick a progressive and not a centrist, or do you think they don't get it?
It does not look as if they get it yet.
I was afraid you were going to say.
But I will say that there are people around Hillary Clinton who are thinking about it. I'm just not sure the people who really are masterminding this campaign are all the way on board.
Hi, David Beck with Self Help Credit Union in North Carolina, a state that longs for divided government right now. What's going on? Or at least in my view. But so one of my question, Obama's approval rating is now over 50%, climbing. And one of it, as someone who's supporting Hillary Clinton, it's very frustrating to me if she is running for the third term, the lack of support that is translating to Hillary. I know she's not the most inspiring candidate, but it's a little bit, I guess, it feels a little hypocritical of a lot of the Bernie supporters to not be, I mean, they're sort of saying we want change, but they're not calling out the president. So I'm just curious your thoughts on that. So
I want to be really blunt. Like, people like him.
like Obama or Bernie?
They like the president. And so when people like you, they kind of give you a little bit of a pass on the things that that you don't do, that you're not doing what they want you to do. I will say, though, the president has never shown that he can turn out votes for anybody else other than himself.
Yeah.
And so that is why his approval rating is important to be high, because it keeps the negatives down, but it's not decisive.
So, curious though, on that point, who's the last president that did actually turn out for someone other than himself?
I mean, Reagan maybe did for the first George Bush in the '88 election. I think that probably mattered. History would tell me.
Clinton in '96 when he ran for re-election?
Clinton in '96 when he ran for re-election was helpful to people. He helped bring in and in '98 really.
They had an off year.
Yeah, '98 where he really, we had the most successful off year that we've seen. And so, there are presidents who are able to do it at different times. The president, Barack Obama, hasn't really shown that he's either has the inclination or the ability to turn out voters for other people. So we'll see.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I will also say, most elections are about the future, and they're about that person, right? And so the thing that makes me nervous more, again, is that Hillary is, the Clinton campaign is still talking about the 90s. And, it's interesting, young Bernie voters, particularly African Americans, they think of Bill Clinton the way my baby boomer friends think about Lyndon Johnson.
Right. Old news.
He's old news, in the same way I look at Lyndon Johnson and I say, oh, he was great, Civil Rights Act, and he did all this war on poverty, and then Vietnam happened, which was tough. But the baby boomers, they started Vietnam, right? And Vietnam is the defining factor of Lyndon Johnson. We talk to particularly younger African Americans, white voters who are associated with Black Lives Matter. They look at criminal justice, and they think about what happened as a result of the '94 criminal justice bill having the same devastating impact on young lives and communities, the way baby boomers think about the Vietnam War destroying communities in the '60s and early '70s. And I think that's what's dangerous about running on the Clinton record is she not only gets to own the positive stuff that happened in the economy, she has to own the negative stuff that some of the younger people who didn't live through it. A lot of us who are older, we have a kind of it's like we have this sort of romantic relationship with Bill Clinton. Like it was great, it was wonderful in '92, MTV, Rock the Vote, everybody had a great time, and then it all kind of fell apart a little bit, and so there's a little bit of a longing. They don't have the romance. All they've got is the fall apart. Right.
The 94 crime bill really wasn't that. I mean, it was sort of after the fact a little bit. I mean, the federal. So anyway.
We got a long line for
yeah,
questions. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
George?
The thing you haven't spoken about yet is what I think is the most important long-term outcome of this election, which is the Supreme Court. If it's a very tight election, do you perceive that we're going to get back to 9 justices at any time in the near future, or they just, and then one of them will die and retire and we'll have 7, and another one will die and retire and we'll have 6, and nobody will be able to figure out how to confirm a new Supreme Court justice?
I do think we'll confirm a Supreme Court justice, and I think that we will probably it'll happen sooner rather than later. What I think the president made a mistake by appointing Merrick Garland, nominating Merrick Garland. I think that the only way President Obama's Supreme Court justice gets filled is if Hillary Clinton wins the election. Hillary Clinton needs as much help as possible to win the election, and Merrick Garland is not the kind of candidate that gets core Democrats excited about winning the election, about turning out. So, but this is, Barack Obama does Barack Obama things, and like this is kind of the way this is the way he operates, and so he picked a choice that was probably fit his mold, fit what he wanted.
If he had picked Elizabeth Warren, then the race would be about getting Elizabeth Warren on the Supreme Court, and that would turn out a lot of progressives.
That would have done it. I think he could have picked Loretta Lynch out of the Justice Department, and you would have seen a storm. I would have changed all the Hillary Clinton ads to put Loretta on the Supreme Court, vote Hillary. I think I would have solved a lot of problems among the African American community. Doing great.
Yeah.
But I do think, to answer your question, I think if Hillary Clinton wins the Senate, the Republican Senate will probably then, which is what they're banking on, think about confirming Merrick Garland to prevent Hillary from picking a more liberal, in the lame duck.
Hi, I have a theory, and I'm curious what you think about my theory.
Yeah.
Donald Trump has been sort of a Teflon candidate. There have been 15 Republican candidates who have tried to take him down, and it hasn't worked. And so I'm a little bit concerned about how this is going to go in the general, and if he's going to continue to be a Teflon candidate. So my theory is that I think Carly Fiorina, of all people, had probably the best success, and I think it's because she took a sort of bemused, pitying attitude toward him of saying, "Oh, bless your heart, sweetheart, that you think these crazy things," and didn't actually appear to take him very seriously. And I feel like when people got angry, it gave him a little bit more legitimacy. And I think it's very easy to get angry because he says these crazy things. But I just am curious as to what you think about this theory, because I would love to see Hillary take that sort of bless your heart attitude toward him. And I'm just curious what you think about that.
I think that Carly Fiorina did it. I think the way that President Obama handles Trump is really well. He kind of belittles him and makes fun of him. And I think Trump is so thin-skinned that just it unnerves him, and so part of this is psychological warfare when you're in a campaign, and you wake up. I had a job when I worked for Gore in 2000. Our job was to think every day how we could unnerve the Bush campaign. Just like, can we just piss them off? Like when they show up, can we plan so we would look at the schedule and see where Bush was going to be any day of the week, and try to plan a story in that market, so that when they arrived in town and they opened the newspaper, it would just piss them off that this happened. And so, like, you're always thinking, how can you get into the other candidate's head? And I think that's a pretty good way of doing it.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Eva Poon, and I work at Bank of America, and I'm actually asking this question as a millennial.
Yes.
I'm curious of your opinion on the proliferation of technology, specifically social media, and how you think that's affected this campaign and maybe any future campaigns moving forward.
It's amazing that the 68, 69-year-old Donald Trump is the master of social media, right? He has figured out how to use, particularly Twitter, in a way that I think everybody who's ever studied the presidency is like the words the way he uses it, but the people all seem to get it, and he drives the news cycle. And so everyone else is going to have to figure out how to do better. Particularly, there are all these new channels, and the thing about most politicians is nobody wants to be first when it comes to these new things. Everybody wants to be second, right? Let's see how something else worked, and then let's go do it. The current president, Barack Obama, they were really good at not just resting on their laurels about what social media trends were working now, but thinking about what they could do going forward. I mean, look at him yesterday. He was in Vietnam. This isn't social media, but this just shows you where he's thinking. He was in Vietnam, and he did a Anthony Bourdain segment, right? Because he's going after these markets where you have to go to where the people are. Don't wait for the people to come to you. You have to go find them where they are and do it. So I think Snapchat, WhatsApp, I mean, they need to blanket all this stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Last question.
I'm
I'm sure it is.
My name is Amy Dine, and my question is, I really think your point about likability is so critical. And what upsets me is that I have Republican friends who so viscerally hate Hillary Clinton and both Clintons that they are voting for Trump. And I have other Republican friends who they're not going to not vote for Trump because they disagree with him too much, as opposed to Democratic ones who are like, fine, I'll just ante up and vote for her as a Democrat because that's the jersey I wear. So I guess my question to you is, what would you advise her to do? Because even I admire her. I would love to work with her. I would love to work for her. I grew up in the city, so I probably know too much secondhand information. The people who advise her are really smart and wonderful and admirable.
Yeah.
What would you tell them to do?
Be for something big. Even if you can't get it done, be for something big. I've come around on free college or tuition. I used to think it was a silly thing and kind of like, oh, that's not really going to happen and whatever. But it just sounds great, And I think people understand that. And I had someone explain this to me who was a Bernie supporter, that even if we understand he probably can't get it done, but if we ask for free and we get half free, then we're better off than if we ask for half and then we get a quarter. And so if you think about the other two candidates who are in the race who are really inspiring people, you have Trump on one hand, who people just seem to genuinely like. It doesn't matter what he does, what he says, people just trust him and like him. The people who like him, love him, right? And then you've got Bernie Sanders, who I think is kind of crotchety, right? Like he's a little bit of like a cranky old dude. But people love what he stands for and they love his ideas. I don't know if there's anything that Hillary Clinton can do after 25 years in the national spotlight to change how people think about her personally in the next 6 months. But I think she can give them, she can adopt, not necessarily the Bernie policies, but she can adopt the Bernie stance of being for things that people really like and trying to use that as a way to appeal to them. Think about every time Donald Trump goes into, if you watch a Donald Trump rally, and it's funny, when I was on CNN, they used to do this with Barack Obama, they had Barack Obama on television, even when they weren't listening to him, they didn't have his voice on, they just had his face on. Oh, Barack Obama rally happening right now, and then you'd see his face. They do the same thing with Trump now, which shows you it's all about ratings. If you put Trump's face on television, or you say Donald Trump's speech in 10 minutes, and people come and watch it. With Hillary, I think she's got to find a way to get people excited about what she wants to do, so that they then will pay more attention to her when she walks in. When Trump goes in, he does a speech. He did the coal miners a week or so ago. He walked in, the first thing he said is, I'm going to bring coal miners back. He just promised them, I'm going to bring coal mines back. I mean, you don't know how he's going to do it.
Right.
You don't know if it's going to work. It can't really work.
Right.
But the people who are there, the coal miners, yeah, bring the coal miners back.
Well, on that note, because I don't think people here want to bring the coal mines back, we'll close. Thank you, Jamal.